This is going to be a long video. Fasten your seatbelts. We're going to jump straight in. Jacob Navok. Do y'all remember who this person is? Thomas Mahler. Do y'all remember who this is? Apparently in May of 2024, Mr. Navok posted something about how financial investments go into game development in the AAA space with pricing and such, and he was talking about Square Enix's financial results. If anybody remembers, more recently, Jacob Navok published a little missive of the change in the gaming industry and how one of the bosses back then in Square Enix, when he was doing some work with them, was talking about how video games were going to move to more of a network style thing, basically a platform version of what they are today. So in this post, he was saying, many thanks to everyone who retweeted my dive into Square Enix's financial results. I noticed a few recurring questions that I'd like to respond here. First, I've seen several questions about how to build games cheaper or set budgets based on smaller sales figures. It is important to understand that game budgeting is an art rather than a science. I've very rarely seen a game stick to its budget. Through the creative process, you may go back into pre-production 3 times, or throw out an entire game's direction, or find that the gameplay sucks, or that testing means that you need to completely rewrite the game mode you're working on. This is how games like Helldivers 2 go from an estimated 3 years of development to 7+ years. Interesting stuff. Linear paths do not exist for game dev. Making a game is not like painting a picture with Bob Ross, or like making a movie, which by the way go well over time and budget all the time. My old boss, Yoichi Wada, who ran Square Enix for over a decade, used to say, guys, this stuff is long, man. I hope, as like I said, go get a drink, okay? And if you're driving, you're good to go. Most consumer software like Word or Slack, hold on, am I even reading this? Okay, yeah, we go. Used to say that games are the most complex and mass form of consumer software. Most consumer software like Word or Slack can run only on a CPU or even in a browser. Only games require GPUs, a specialized complex piece of hardware to be able to run. There's a reason that Apple showed off their iPhone 15 last year by promoting games like Resident Evil and Death Stranding being able to run on them. Today, ChatGPT and other LLMs can probably lay claim to being more complex than games, again, in terms of mass consumer software, given that they require huge numbers or even more complex GPUs than consoles run. But the point that I'm making is that games are exceptional relative to most forms of other software. In some, games are technically complex pieces of software that, unlike most other software, also require significant investments in story, art, interactive design, and network design, and devs will always go wrong before it goes right. When a producer comes to you and says, sorry, this isn't working, we're going to need 12 more months to redo and retest half of the game, you can't say, sorry, you're over budget, ship it as is, as a publisher at Square Enix. A 10% additional investment in time or budget will be the difference between 5 out of 10 game and a 9 out of 10 game, and generates millions of units more sold. And there is no world where everything in a creative product always goes the way it is intended. Final Fantasy 12 and 15 both had a change of director, Matsuno Tabata, during development. 15 famously took a decade to make and started off as a FF13 spin-off. You cannot dictate. Devs, be more efficient. You have to be able to know which creatives to give control, when to cut your losses, and to have cash reserves to pivot. And as technology changes, games tend to change. There are huge technological strides in the last 2 or 3 years in the industry. Forget 5 years. In the 90s, Final Fantasy VII had as many myriad of things to do as 16, and also pushed the edge of computer graphics, taking up nearly all of the CGI capacity of Japan at the time, a story its developers love to repeat to me over drinks. Final Fantasy VII was done faster because the technology was simpler and the bleeding edge of graphics at a far lower fidelity. Engineers did not have not gotten less skilled, and artists have not gotten worse at their craft. In ensuing decades, everything has just gotten better. It's the bar that is set higher because of what it takes to achieve fidelity. I said this before. Let me take a break. The conversation around the different titles, right? When you think about it, after a lot of these games that came out in the PS4 generation, where everybody was trying to push visual fidelity and stuff, it really did affect the gaming industry in a different way. And I think that's a big transformation. Everybody wants to make their game look fantastic. To that end, you cannot make a 20-hour AA Final Fantasy and have it still be Final Fantasy. You can make a 100-hour AA game like Octopath, or you can make an incredible 20-hour AAA game like Alan Wake 2, which, by the way, did not recoup its dev cost on launch. But the Final Fantasy brand is supposed to be spectacular. 100+ hour AAA journey. That is what the brand means. Anything less will get terrible reaction from consumers. So if you want to make cheaper, shorter, lower quality products, you need to use a different brand. Square Enix attempted shorter, lower, cheap new brands. That is how you got successes like aforementioned Octopath, though nowhere near the revenue of an FF. The failures like Balan Wonderland, as well as mid-tiers like Foam Stars. It's hard to create new IP to empower creators to try new things. Many times they are failures, but we should not accuse Square Enix of not trying. They made many attempts and they should be lauded for all their attempts, and instead we're shamed. If every game needs to be 9 out of 10 for you to buy, the problem is going to be exacerbated. When you purchase 6 out of 10 games or 7 out of 10 games from a new IP, you help the publisher justify its investment into a better version of the next title. But the wall of voting has been clear. People aren't buying 6 out of 10 games. Square Enix shouldn't even try to make smaller, cheaper games unless the 9 out of 10 quality grader, and turns out quality is really expensive, even for smaller games like Alan Wake 2. Stephen Totilo put the results in the trend seen across the industry succinctly. To that end, Final Fantasy as a brand cannot simply get smaller or be made better, be made cheaper, and still be Final Fantasy. And frankly speaking, the lesson from my prior thread isn't being learned in responses that say Final Fantasy specifically should become smaller or cheaper. Cost is not the problem. Sale price and market size are the problem. We need to admit that a larger portion of players today prefer service games and are voting with their wallets and time playing titles like Genshin Impact instead. Guys, this is his conversation from last year. This is not the long one that he did this year. It is plausible that if Sony released the number, somebody sent me this stuff, by the way, because I actually bookmarked it. I just don't remember who. If you're watching this video, shout out to you. The lifetime revenue of Fortnite, Warzone, GTA 5 Online mode on PS5 would dwarf the combined totals of the titles after them. Today, even first-party titles like The Last of Us are fodder to get you to buy PS5 so that your service game of choice is played on PS instead of Xbox. Fixed-price AAA titles that don't belong to the platform holder are going to be for smaller audiences and for the niche audiences to get the same level of quality they need to justify the purchase. Price of third-party publishers will have to go up. So, basically, all the third-party boxes are exactly what they are, third-party boxes. We also should not expect publicly traded AAA publishers to become AA publishers. Square's efforts with Balan were to build new IP, but these new IP were never being counted to be the main driver of returns because new IP and lower price point titles can't incrementally move the needle enough for a company at Square Enix's size. They were seeds for the future and failed to bloom. Public publishers will continue to place their main bets on the side of the market they can influence, and the most AAA, while gamers should look to indies and smaller publishers for their AA hits because expectations from consumers and investors are different between the two. The real puzzle to me, which I hinted in the previous thread, is why someone other than Square made Genshin Impact. That should have been their market to capture. Expect creating a smaller title to be a major focus the next few years. So I return to the problems that Final Fantasy brand was not selling to what the product budget needed it to be. Part of this was this is going to be resolved by going multi-platform. And a part of the problem is simply greater competition that isn't recoverable from. Today, Final Fantasy XIV and free-to-play mobile titles are subsidizing the fixed-price titles, further indicating their consumers are willing to spend the most time and money within Square Enix's family of titles. Next, a recurring theme that I saw in discourse in a prior thread was with regard to games being art and capitalism. I'll note that the context of the original thread was statements made by Square Enix, a publicly traded company, on their annual financial results. A public company, unless its mission statement is otherwise, has a fiduciary duty to its shareholders. This includes Japanese firms. There was a time where some Japanese public companies cared less about share price in the name of employment, but a lifetime employment system broke down after the bubble collapsed in the 90s. Square Enix's shareholders include Enix founder Fukushima-san, several major Japanese banks, Vanguard, my own company's 401k, JP Morgan Chase, and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, and many more. PIF has a large enough holding to have the board representation. I hope you guys haven't checked out yet. When a bank like JP Morgan gives you interest on your savings account, it does so from profits it receives by holding shares in companies like Square Enix. Similarly, when Japanese banks invest in Square Enix, they do so with the deposits to their customers. Financial systems are deeply intertwined. There is a lesson to be learned here. This is why PlayStation's Fireside Chat to its investors is very important. I keep seeing people make very critical errors talking about the PlayStation business as if to say it's immune from wanting more money. I told y'all when I did my AI model building for what PlayStation needs to raise its margins to 10% or more, that the investors are not going to stop at 10%. They're going to want more, inevitably breaking the final hold of PlayStation to keep its games multi-platform, because it has to at some point make that money somewhere, somehow. It cannot continue to hold the box as the primary driver of its gaming, seeing as nobody is really wanting to care much about the box anyways, because we've all selected our flags and we're going to stick to it. By golly, we're going to stick to it. The Xbox guy ain't buying your PlayStation. The PC guy is not buying your PlayStation. And the Nintendo guy who bought your PlayStation isn't interested in your PlayStation. And vice versa in many cases. Except, of course, PC is kind of exceptional, because even if you may not want to buy a gaming PC, you can use your PC for gaming even if it's not a gaming PC, which makes it kind of weird. And mobile, that's why mobile is exploded. Because even if you don't want to buy a gaming device, you can buy your phone, which you can use for gaming. I don't know if anybody caught that connotation, but again, let's keep reading. It's the responsibility of the company to generate the best return it can in order to fulfill its obligations to its shareholders. By definition, many companies will not surpass the average return of the stock market. And by definition, many companies do surpass. The better the company performs, the higher its shares go, the more it can afford to reinvest. If a public company intentionally set its budgets to underperform stock market returns, it would have a harder time raising money, servicing debt, and in turn, sustaining its employees. This does not mean that the company will hit its financial goals, but it does mean that in general, public companies must seek better returns. The company may alternatively focus on growth or dividends or other financial goals that fits the business in a sector. Whew! I'm almost done. Additionally, shareholders elect board members who control the budgets and can hire and fire the CEO. In other words, the CEO of Square Enix reports to his board, who reports to his shareholders, who seek greater returns on investment. This is the case for many public companies without alternative mission statements. That does not mean that their games aren't art for creativity aren't important to their businesses. It does mean that public companies, be it EA, Take-Two, Capcom, Nexon, or otherwise, generally build games to generate returns on investments. Note that the beating stock market on a per dollar basis was only an example of a way to determine a baseline conservative return on investment. In fact, most times, the return on investment for a publisher like Take-Two needs to be substantially higher than just stock market return baselines. There are, of course, non-public game publishers. Valve is one. Epic is another. You also have studios like Larian, which have been able to remain independent, thanks to the gamers. These companies can determine what's important for their returns their own way without the same pressures of public companies. They produce a lot of amazing products. Public companies cannot behave the same way as private companies. The resulting industry, number 1, 2, and 3. Number 1, publicly traded AAA game publishers will focus on fewer titles with a combination of live service, microtransaction, example, Final Fantasy version of Genshin, and a higher price point fixed price called GTA Final Fantasy in the $70 to $150 price range. Number 2, the mid-tier is the domain of independent developers and smaller publishers at the $30 to $60 price point. Number 3, live service titles will increasingly platform ties and offer UGC tools. Expect this to be a greater part of GTA. Whew. So bro shared all this, which I think that I don't see any problem here, except, he worked with Square Enix. So yeah, he's probably got a bias towards Square Enix, but he's explaining this stuff from how you would see a big company like this run. And then insert Thomas Mahler. Oh boy, I think there's a whole lot wrong with this, and I'll try to explain why from a developer's perspective. He said this: if your end goal is to beat the average 14.5 return of the stock market could net you already know that you have to make products that could vastly perform that number, not just a little, but a lot. You should be looking to make products that could end up with 10x ROI. Mr. Mahler, I don't think that's what he said. But again, it is what it is. He said share price. He didn't say the stock market return. He said share price. I don't know. Maybe I missed it. Maybe he said that. Given that you'd shoot yourself in the foot if you continue to make products where profit margins are so slim that you might or might not reach the number while hoping that this huge bet, that this huge bet you just made will turn into a massive hit, it might or might not. In life and in business, it's never wise to bet the whole farm on anything unless you have no other choice. He never said to bet the whole farm. He said that these AAA companies usually drive a lot of the smaller projects using newer names. That's the best way to go. You go take a Final Fantasy game with the expectations of 100 hours and make a 20-hour game, people are going to lose their mind in many cases, apparently. You can't blame gamers or the size of your market or the accepted cost of your product. This is where Mr. Mahler, I don't think he was paying attention to what the market was doing. Those variables are largely out of your control. Meaning, just because you need 15 million players to buy the product that you invested hundreds of millions of dollars into doesn't suddenly mean that 15 million players will somehow turn up and make you whole. He never said that. What's within your control is to analyze the market, understand your audience, and invest into numerous projects that could vastly outperform the return you need to outperform. So do what angel investors do. Invest into a diverse portfolio and maximize your risk by properly vetting each and every single investment. Instead of making one bet and hoping you will win, you make 10 bets so that if 9 of them fail, as long as one of them gets stratospheric. Remember, Mr. Mahler, you are dealing with an industry that is platformatized already. And I think, that kind of almost misses the point of what he's saying in regard to that. Right? So he writes all of this. I think if that's going to happen, a lot of AAA publishers are going to have to go bankrupt since they would react in a superficial way to what the market apparently tells them instead of truly understand what players want. You just said that they need to basically mix it up, right, Mr. Mahler? And I think they are. But even though they're mixing it up, they're not seeing a lot of change. Astrobot, South of Midnight, smaller titles, smaller games. Right? So it's basically them just continuing that cycle of big game, small game, big game, small game, big game, small game, and then just hope that one of them will hit. Right? They did Spider-Man 2, big game. They did Aloy, big game. Then they did Helldivers, small game. Bam! So they're doing it. They're adapting. And it's very interesting, though, nonetheless, to see that a lot of that kind of maybe fell apart in translation. But I wanted to hear your thoughts in this matter, man. I went and pulled this stuff from the archives. And I'd love to hear what it is that you think. If you listen to this all the way, thanks for watching. Peace out.